Last year, the world's 5 richest men added almost $500 billion to their fortunes, while nearly 5 billion people got poorer. Think about that for a second. If you believe that kind of staggering wealth transfer just happened by chance, by some cosmic accident, then you really need to stick around. We're constantly told we live in thriving democracies, right? Places where our votes, our voices are supposed to steer policy, shape our collective future. Yet time and again, when a major crisis hits, whether it's a global pandemic, a devastating bank collapse, or those seemingly endless climate summits, the outcome feels eerily predictable. It's always the same winners emerging from the wreckage, the same powerful asset managers, the same ubiquitous tech giants, the same fossil fuel behemoths. Coincidence? Honestly, that's a tough sell. It's hardly a coincidence when you start to see the patterns. What we're actually witnessing isn't some shadowy, clandestine cabal meeting in a smoke-filled room. No, it's far more insidious and frankly, far more brazen than that. There's a visible, legal, and remarkably well-documented system at play. One that meticulously funnels private fortunes directly into public power. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a structural reality. Today, we're going to map out exactly how this system operates, breaking it down into 4 key steps: how the ultra-rich systematically capture institutions, how they install loyalists in crucial positions, how they literally write the rules of the game, and finally, how they insulate themselves from any real backlash or accountability. We're not talking about tinfoil hats here, folks. This is all laid bare in paperwork, in leaked memos, and in the very numbers they file with regulators. It's all out there if you know where to look. This playbook, this intricate dance between wealth and power, isn't some recent invention. It's a strategy that's been refined over centuries. Let's rewind a bit. Back to 1882, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil wasn't just big. It was a colossus controlling a staggering 90% of US oil refining. How did they achieve such dominance? Through an incredibly dense labyrinthine maze of subsidiary companies, so complex that even Congress needed 3 grueling years just to begin untangling it. They were masters of corporate opacity. When the trust busters finally managed to force a breakup, did the Rockefellers just pack up and go home? Of course not. They simply pivoted, shifting their immense wealth into banks, into philanthropic foundations, and into university endowments. These were places, crucially, where antitrust laws designed to break up monopolies couldn't reach. It was a brilliant, if cynical, tactical evolution. The tactic itself evolved further. Instead of trying to own one entire industry outright, the new strategy became own the referees, own the rule makers. By the 1970s, a potent idea began to take root, carefully cultivated by corporate lawyers and influential economists. The meme, as we'd call it today, was simple but devastatingly effective. Government is the problem. This wasn't just an abstract philosophical concept. It was a deliberate campaign to dismantle public trust and public capacity. The logic went something like this: cut taxes for the wealthy, privatize essential public utilities, systematically hollow out enforcement agencies, and then, inevitably, when these weakened institutions falter, complain loudly about how incompetent they are, rinse, repeat, and most importantly, profit. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about strategically weakening the very bodies that could challenge concentrated power, creating a self-serving cycle where their wealth could grow unchecked, often at the expense of public good and democratic accountability. It was a masterclass in using corruption and influence to shape the very playing field. Let's talk about the infamous revolving door, a mechanism that perfectly illustrates how public service can become a lucrative stepping stone for private gain. Take the Pentagon, for instance. Since 2008, an astonishing 80% of senior defense officials have left their public service roles only to immediately go work for the very top 5 defense contractors they were previously overseeing. Think about that for a moment. One year, they're signing off on multi-billion-dollar UAV contracts. The next, they're collecting 7-figure salaries from those exact same companies. It's not just a cozy relationship, it's a direct pipeline. And what's the kicker? No law explicitly bans this. Disclosure forms, often optional or so vague they're meaningless. The so-called cooling off period, the time former officials are supposed to wait before lobbying their old agency, often feels more like a lunch break than a serious barrier. The result of this unchecked movement between public duty and private profit is utterly predictable. We end up with weapons programs that take 2 decades, to field a single jet, projects that cost double their original estimate, and still ship with glaring software bugs. Who foots the bill for these monumental overruns? You guessed it, the taxpayers. Who pockets the massive profits and bonuses? The shareholders and executives of these same contractors. It's a systemic problem where a lack of robust enforcement allows powerful individuals and corporations to exploit public office for private gain, effectively blurring the lines between government and industry and ensuring minimal accountability for inflated costs or failed projects. This constant churn of personnel between regulatory bodies and the industries they regulate is a prime example of how the wealthy use their influence to ensure a friendly regulatory environment, often at the public's expense. Now, let's turn our attention to something that often wears a benevolent mask: philanthropy. Consider the Gates Foundation. This single private entity spends approximately $5 billion a year. To put that into perspective, that's more than the World Health Organization's entire annual budget. And here's the crucial distinction: because it's private money, no electorate, no public body, no democratic process can redirect its priorities. There's no vote on where that $5 billion goes. Over 2 decades, programs heavily funded by the Gates Foundation have aggressively pushed patented seeds and medicines into African markets. Simultaneously, publicly funded, open source alternatives, often developed with local needs in mind, have found themselves starved for cash, unable to compete with the sheer financial might of the Foundation's initiatives. Here's where it gets even more concerning: when in an effort to prioritize public health, tried to classify essential medicines based on their health value rather than their patent status. Leaked cables revealed that Foundation staff reportedly threatened to pull their donations. Let that sink in. A single family office, through its philanthropic arm, effectively steered global policy on critical issues like malaria, education, and pandemic response. This isn't just charity, it's a powerful form of governance exercised without democratic oversight and sweetened with a hefty tax break. It's a clear illustration of how vast private wealth can effectively capture and influence international institutions, shaping global agendas to align with specific private interests, often with little regard for broader public accountability or diverse perspectives. Ever wonder how some of the world's most profitable companies manage to pay little to no taxes? Let's talk about regulatory shopping, a truly ingenious mechanism of wealth preservation. Take Amazon, for example. Between 2017 and 2019, despite raking in over $30 billion in profits, their tax bill was effectively $0. How on earth does that happen? Years earlier, an army of corporate lobbyists working tirelessly on behalf of companies like Amazon drafted what they cleverly called performance-based incentives. These weren't just minor tax breaks. These were sophisticated legislative proposals that essentially allowed states and municipalities to bid against each other for the privilege of hosting new warehouses or facilities. It became an open auction, a race to the bottom, where cities desperate for jobs would offer incredible concessions. Full police coverage, massive road expansions specifically for Amazon trucks, even employee training grants funded by local taxpayers. Amazon, of course, played the field masterfully, pocketing an estimated $4 billion in subsidies. And then, here's the kicker. When those generous tax abatements expired, they simply closed the facility and moved on to the next town offering a sweeter deal. This isn't just a clever business strategy, it's a profound perversion of public policy. States and cities are now locked in a frantic competition to offer the most generous incentives, often sacrificing long-term revenue for short-term promises, faster than shoppers can click buy online. Meanwhile, local businesses, the ones that actually pay property taxes, that fund our schools, our libraries, our public services, can't possibly compete with these corporate giants. They're left struggling, often forced to close. Is a classic example of how one hand, guided by immense wealth and lobbying power, writes the loophole, while the other hand, the corporate hand, signs the checks for the politicians who enable it. This systematic distortion of public policy by wealthy corporations ensures that tax revenues are reduced, resources are diverted from essential public services, and the playing field is tilted overwhelmingly in favor of the already powerful. In our increasingly digital world, power isn't just about land or resources, it's about data, and the ultra-rich have found a new frontier for extraction: data colonization. Remember Facebook's Free Basics program? It offered free internet to the global poor, primarily in developing nations. Sounds philanthropic, right? But there was a catch, a crucial condition. Users had to stay inside Meta's walled garden. They could access Facebook, WhatsApp, and a limited number of other approved sites, but not the open internet. Governments from India to Zambia were pressured into signing zero-rating deals, which gave Facebook an undeniable first-mover advantage on identity infrastructure. If you're the first way millions of people experience the internet, you become the de facto gatekeeper. When India's regulators, recognizing the threat to net neutrality, tried to ban the program, Facebook didn't back down. They spent a reported $50 million on full-page newspaper ads, framing net neutrality as an elitist concept, something that would deny connectivity to the masses. The campaign ultimately failed in India, thanks to a robust public outcry and strong regulatory action. But it succeeded in dozens of smaller countries where telecom regulators, lacking the resources or political will to resist, now rely heavily on Facebook software to verify their own citizens. Think about the implications. Today, if you vote, pay taxes, or register a business in parts of Africa and Latin America, your fundamental civic data often transits through servers located in Menlo Park, California. The old colonial powers used gunboats to extract resources and control populations. The new data colonizers use APIs and free services. This isn't just about convenience. It's about controlling the digital infrastructure, shaping information flows, and ultimately wielding immense power over populations, all while collecting vast amounts of personal data that fuels their advertising empires. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of power where data begets more influence, which begets more data, further entrenching the dominance of these tech giants. Let's zoom in on a stark, real-world example of institutional capture. The story of the Gupta family in South Africa. 3 brothers arrived in 1993 with a seemingly modest computer business. Fast forward to 2015, and their influence had grown to such an extent that they were effectively choosing South Africa's finance minister, the energy minister, and even the board of the state-owned rail company. How did they achieve this breathtaking level of control? Their method was disturbingly simple and effective, a classic playbook of corruption. They would hire the relatives of key government officials, pick up their tabs at lavish Dubai hotels, and offer them consulting shares in shell companies, essentially bribes disguised as legitimate business dealings. When a cabinet member, against all odds, refused to play ball, the country's intelligence agencies, which by this point were run by Gupta appointees, would fabricate a corruption case against her and have her summarily fired. Parliament was completely bypassed, its authority undermined. State-owned enterprises were forced to sign coal contracts priced 40% above market rates, costing the South African Treasury an estimated $7 billion. This was systemic, calculated looting. The entire facade only began to unravel when a trove of leaked emails revealed something truly astonishing. A single Gupta nephew, from his iPhone, was approving cabinet appointments. The sheer audacity was mind-boggling. The lesson here is profound. Institutional capture doesn't necessarily require billions of dollars in overt bribes. It requires something far more strategic. Owning the appointment calendar. It means placing loyalists in key positions, from ministers to intelligence chiefs, who will then ensure weak enforcement, protect corrupt dealings, and further entrench the power of those pulling the strings. This is the epitome of elite capture, where a wealthy few exploit every lever of power to their own benefit, disregarding democratic norms and public welfare. So, with all this evidence, all this documentation, why does it feel like nothing ever truly sticks? Why do the powerful so often seem to operate with impunity? Take the case of Jacob Zuma, South Africa's former president, whose alleged ties to the Guptas led to years of investigations. Prosecutors tried him for 12 years, but every lead prosecutor on the case eventually resigned or was mysteriously reassigned. Sound familiar? It's a pattern we see globally. Consider the US and Donald Trump's tax returns. They were reportedly under audit since 2002. Yet the IRS unit, specifically handling presidential tax returns, consisted of precisely one part-time agent. When Congress finally requested those files, Treasury lawyers, many of whom were former partners at law firms that had represented Trump, deliberately slow-walked the subpoenas until the statute of limitations conveniently lapsed. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's often a built-in feature. The richer the target, the thinner the enforcement budget seems to get. It's a deliberate strategy. Starve the referee of resources, then complain loudly about all the missed calls. This weak enforcement and lack of accountability are not accidental. They are products of a system where the wealthy have the means to employ the best legal minds, to lobby for underfunded regulatory bodies, and to ensure that conflicts of interest are overlooked. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where impunity for the powerful becomes the norm, further strengthening their networks of influence and expanding opportunities for even more corruption. When justice is a luxury only the poor can't afford, the system itself becomes a tool for maintaining elite power. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is all happening in boardrooms and political backrooms far away from my daily life, but this shadow governance has very real, very painful consequences right in your living room, on your utility bill, and in your community. Let's look at Texas. In 2022, the state froze. Millions were left without power in sub-zero temperatures. What happened? Natural gas plants, which had generously donated $18 million to state regulators, were conveniently exempted from crucial winterization rules. When the unprecedented cold hit, pipes burst, equipment failed, and electricity prices didn't just spike, they skyrocketed by an astronomical 10,000%. Families received utterly devastating $10,000 bills for a single week of heat. 17 million people lost power. Over 200 lives were tragically lost. The same firms that had skipped those vital upgrades, the ones whose donations bought them exemptions, booked record profits during the crisis. The CEO of one supplier, with astonishing callousness, even joked, "It's like hitting the jackpot." He wasn't kidding. His shareholders later voted him a $25 million bonus. This isn't just a natural disaster, it's a man-made catastrophe facilitated by regulatory capture. Every extra dollar on your utility bill, every moment you shiver in the dark, is a dividend for someone who paid to keep the rules weak, who ensured that public safety took a backseat to private profit. This is a visceral example of how political corruption by wealthy individuals and corporations directly distorts public policy and spending priorities, leading to real-world suffering and death, all while enriching the powerful. But maybe, just maybe, these ultra-rich individuals are simply smarter, more innovative, more deserving. They're just better at business, the narrative often goes. Really? Let's put that idea to the test. Researchers at Princeton and Northwestern universities conducted a groundbreaking study comparing 1,779 policy issues over 2 decades. Their findings were stark and unambiguous. When economic elites wanted a change, they got it a staggering 78% of the time. Mass-based interest groups, representing the majority of citizens, succeeded only 24% of the time. The curve flattens dramatically once you hit the top 0.1% of wealth holders. At that rarefied level, an extra IQ point matters far less than an extra senator willing to take your call or a well-placed lobbyist. Wealth in this context isn't simply a reward for innovation or hard work. It's a leverage ratio. It's a multiplier on other people's labor, on their creativity, and most crucially, on the rulebook itself. It allows them to shape the very game, not just play it exceptionally well. This isn't about natural talent, it's about systemic advantage. It's about how concentrated wealth allows individuals to influence elections, shape legislation, and control media narratives, effectively distorting democratic governance and reinforcing their own privileged positions. It fundamentally undermines the idea that hard work alone leads to success, revealing a system rigged in favor of those who can afford to buy influence. So, what can we actually do about this? It can feel overwhelming, but individual and collective actions truly matter. First, stop funding them blindly. Think about where your money sleeps. Move your savings from those massive, often ethically dubious corporate banks to local credit unions or public banks that actually disclose their lending portfolios. Know where your money is going and ensure it aligns with your values. Second, and this is crucial, vote in down ballot races. We often focus on presidential elections, but the real fine print, the rules that impact your daily life, are written by utility commissions, by attorneys general, by state supreme courts. These are the posts that shape regulations, enforce laws, and protect consumers. These local and state level officials are often the gatekeepers of the very systems we have discussed. Your vote there has an outsized impact. Third, support journalism that names names, that digs into these stories, that holds power accountable. Paywalls might cost a few dollars, but they cost far less than the hidden subsidies and unchecked corruption that drain our public coffers. Independent investigative journalism is our watchdog, and it needs our support to thrive. And fourth, and this is something you can do right now, share this video. YouTube's algorithm, like many social media platforms, boosts content that keeps viewers engaged and on the platform. If you watch this to the end and then hit that share button, you're actively nudging the conversation toward accountability, toward understanding, instead of just outrage bait. Do it now before the next manufactured crisis distracts us, before the next headline pulls our attention away from the systemic issues that truly matter. Your action, however small it seems, contributes to a larger shift. The shadow government isn't some clandestine group of cloaked figures meeting in secret. It's far more mundane and far more powerful. It's a conveyor belt. It's a meticulously designed system where billion-dollar fortunes buy slickly produced think tank papers. Those papers then magically transform into draft bills which glide effortlessly through committees chaired by revolving door veterans who, in turn, land cushy seats on foundation boards after their public service. Each cycle, each turn of the wheel, tightens the gears of this machine, making it harder to dismantle. The only real conspiracy here isn't a secret plan, it's the conspiracy of silence. It's the quiet, often unconscious acceptance that this is just how the world works. It's the resignation that allows these systems to operate unchecked. But here's the powerful truth: systems built by human choices can absolutely be unmade by human choices. The first, most critical step is simply seeing the belt, understanding how it operates. Now that you've seen the mechanisms, the next move, the next choice is entirely yours.